I would like to talk about Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge, because it's a game that is um, both modern and arcade-like in its sensibilities. Now I have to clarify what I mean by modern and arcade-like. Arcade games have really good, strong gameplay density. I'm old enough to remember the original R-Type coming out, playing it and finding ingenious game design. The idea that you have a ship, it has a force attachment to it, you can launch it and everything else like that, and all the gameplay elements, all the different weapons get attached to it. And if you collided with any part of the scenery, or you collided with any bullets that were being fired, you would lose a life, get sent back to a checkpoint, and have to figure out how to get back into the game from a weakened position with your craft having that weapon. Old arcade games forced you to engage with its mechanics. These machines are coin ops, where you put a coin in, and should you fail to engage with the game's mechanics, if you weren't dodging, you weren't fighting, you weren't defending yourself in some beat 'em up, then you'll get to a fail state pretty quickly. Maybe 3 lives, and then a game over, and a big continue counting downwards. So modern games don't have that. They don't have that kind of gameplay density. You get the sense that a lot of these games that are being made these days want to be movies, and also want to be criticized by critics as movies. So the story gets commented on, how it pulls on the heartstrings gets commented on. The voice acting is even important now. But with games, that's not what a game is. Games are made to be played, is the counter argument. These are arcade games, understood that. If they told you a story, maybe in its visual design, maybe in its sound design, maybe a scrolling text that you could skip or miss very easily. The language of games is gameplay. It's gameplay density, failure state, stuff like collision detection is important, and also the game mechanics. The language of games shouldn't be the language of cinema, of acting, story, and narrative. Just to be clear, I do like narratives in games, every now and again. I do like Kingdom Come Deliverance, Batman Arkham Knight and things like that. I did enjoy. But increasingly now, I find that the modern AAA titles are leaning heavier and heavier towards story, towards pulling on heartstrings, and towards emotion. Towards cinema, really. They want to be movies. Whereas there doesn't seem to be many AAA games that are kind of for my market. I can think of Wanted Dead off the top of my head recently, but that's about it. Games that are really complicated in terms of mechanics. Shmups are very complicated in terms of mechanics. Stuff like Ketsui and Donpachi. I'm having to buy older titles to kind of get my gameplay fix. And part of the reason I think that shmups aren't being made as AAA titles is that people don't understand them. Some people, I think, that engage with shmups play them this way. They credit feed, and they just get hit multiple times. They don't engage with the mechanics very well, and after 30 minutes of gameplay, they're pretty much done. And everyone here knows that's not the right way to kind of connect with them. It's a good idea to go through them slowly, get the 1cc, engage with mechanics, figure out how to survive, figure out how to get that high score, figure out all the juicy stuff that's in there, and realize that all shmups are not made equal, and that certain shmups have different mechanics, more interesting mechanics, less interesting mechanics, and some shmups you can collide with scenery, some shmups you don't. Some shmups are like puzzles, kind of almost like R-Type, where you have to figure out how to get that right route, whereas others are just crazy bullet dodging reflex actions. So I don't think that with shmups not being made as AAA titles anymore, it's a kind of like, it demonstrates an ignorance of what can be done with the genre. But I'm not going to talk about shmups just yet. I'm going to talk about Ninja Gaiden 3. And in many ways, Ninja Gaiden 3 is very interesting because it's partly a modern game and partly a old school arcade game. And there's different modes within the menu that kind of, it has it both ways almost, but it's a very divisive title. Ninja Gaiden 3 wasn't well received at the time. Everyone hated it. Ninja Gaiden 2 is the most hardcore of hardcore action games. And Ninja Gaiden 3 felt like a betrayal of that. It felt like all the modern stuff, like QTEs, story elements, were pushed towards the forefront. And it suffered because of that. It felt like a betrayal almost. This is hardcore game. And people wanted it. And it was a most prime example of just pure action. And then it kind of fell for this, pursuing this audience that wanted story and a narrative and a emotional father-daughter relationship in its cutscenes, and it just wasn't what people wanted. But of course, this is what the critics focused on. They focused on the main game. Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge has a smattering of improvements. The combat is excellent, I would maintain. But some of the boss battles do really stink. Particularly in a fight with a Tyrannosaurus Rex that's been mind controlled is particularly tedious. And there's a few helicopter fights I remember that have lots of QTEs to them. And it just didn't... The core combat of Ninja Gaiden 3 was excellent, but the level design was very flat. It had QTEs. Razor's Edge included collectibles, which were so not far off the beaten path. It was actually quite comical. But that's the main game. The main game is a modern game. This tries to be a AAA title. It tries to be this narrative, and it just doesn't quite fit together. But there is another way to play Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge. There's something called a Trials mode, and it is excellent. This is where you explore the core combat of the game, and it's just that and nothing else. It's quite telling, in fact, that a lot of the bosses that suck within the main game are not in the Trials mode. The Trials mode does have boss battles from Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2. Has enemies from Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2. It's quite comprehensive in that way. It gives you everything you could possibly need in terms of that core Ninja Gaiden hardcore combat. It's all here. The difficulty levels, it begins out quite low and goes to Mentor, which even gives me trouble, and has about 2 or 3 more difficulty levels above that. So the skill ceiling is incredibly high. It doesn't rank you the same way as Devil May Cry does, in terms of the flamboyance of the combat, the combos, the variations that you need to input. But the survival of it is fast enough, it's hardcore enough and exciting enough to be absolutely brilliant. It is the best combat system I think I've ever encountered. Best combat system I've encountered, and it's buried underneath this horrible game. So once you manage to divorce the narrative from the core combat, once you get into the nitty gritty of the dodge slash cut combo system, survival system, of the pure combat system, and you all these floods of enemies coming toward you, it is so good and so brilliant. And even watching back my own gameplay of in the Ninja Cinema, which you can do, of just me dodging and cutting and doing some of the most awesome stuff, the Unizuna drops, the engaging with the other mechanics and the combat system, it's just beautiful and brilliant. There are some things I do miss from if I'm playing Ninja Gaiden 2 that are in 3 but not in 2. The dodge mechanic, instead of rolling like you did in Ninja Gaiden 1, or I think dashing which you did in Ninja Gaiden 2, you slide in Ninja Gaiden 3, which can have a little stun effect on enemies. So once you're sliding out the way and dodging, there's a little bump you can put enemies into a small stun. I think it's a bit too much in terms of heavy attack in Ninja Gaiden 3. There's too many enemies with shields. And the way you start as Zuna drops is by hitting a light attack. And not every time you get a light attack hit. And so it's very difficult to not just to spam the heavy button, as opposed to have the variation that 2 provides. The way that the Ninpo works adds a layer of tension. So as you're fighting and killing enemies, the Ninpo increases to a full gauge bar like a Super in Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Once that's filled up, you can unleash the Ninpo attack, which obviously is like a smart bomb, but also the smart bomb restores health, so that you have to go, in the sense that there's a sense of tension where it's just building and building and building. You're getting, if you're low on health, you've got this combat mechanic almost of this Nimpo attack, which can save you from being killed. There's also attacks that can be countered by heavy attack. When enemies glow bright red, that gives you an opportunity to counterattack and do a rust and bone maneuver. There's also the ultimate technique, which is back, is more spectacular than ever. But ultimately, it's the core combat. It's the dodging Azuna drops and everything like that. That is so fluid here that I just want people to maybe just give it another shot and reintroduce themselves to it. And yes, the core game of Ninja Gaiden 3 isn't great, but this mode has such a high skill ceiling and is so beautiful to even watch back your own replays of, but it's so intuitive to perform. I think this is one of the best combat experiences that you can have in any game at the moment. So that's my recommendation. Ninja Gaiden 3 Razor's Edge is available in Ninja Gaiden Master Collection, I think it's called. Yeah, just don't go for the main campaign and judge it solely on that, because that's where all the QTEs are, and that's where the story is, and all the flabby stuff is. Whereas the hardcore gameplay density is in the Trials mode. It's got a massive skill ceiling, it's got something for everyone, it's got a lot of the enemies from Ninja Gaiden 1 and 2. It's like a greatest hits album of all of Ninja Gaiden. And the core combat is excellent. It's all there. Some weapons are missing, that's true. But this is just such a wonderful palette cleanser for people that want real gameplay density, fast-paced action. I don't think there's anything better really out there, to be quite honest. And it's worth giving it another look.